But what I'm happy about is not that mainly, nor is it to present this book, or even to meet you. It's that Mauricio Rojas has written the Spanish foreword to this book, and he, perhaps you know this, perhaps you don't, he's not only one of the leading Spanish-speaking intellectuals, but one of the best intellectuals in the Swedish-speaking world, and one of my very few people I would say is an idol, so thank you. Having said this, I am happy to speak to you. This book is a result of a number of papers I wrote, 2 papers I wrote that gained a lot of international attention. Then I wrote a short book, gained a lot of international attention. What is the perception of a Nordic model? The perception of a Nordic model is, to me, who has lived in Sweden, grown up in Sweden, and written extensively about various social issues in Sweden, the perception of the Swedish model is funny. Because it is very much an idealistic vision that has quite little to do with the realities of the Nordic countries. Now, today in Chile, I understand that the socialists are saying we should have socialism. Why? We will become Sweden. This is not unique to Chile. This is not something new. For many decades, there has been a myth of the Nordic model, of Nordic socialism. Let me show you a quote. This is Time magazine, 1976. They explain, Sweden is a country whose very name has become a synonym for a materialist paradise. And they continue to explain the quote, as you can read in the book. There are no social problems in Sweden. No pollution, no slums. It's perfect. It's paradise. And it's not only Sweden, but also the other Nordic countries. Here's National Public Radio in America. They run a story now about a country that seems to violate the laws of the economic universe. Violate the laws of the economic universe. By this they mean high taxes, slows down growth in every country. It is the law of the economic universe. But Denmark, it's a magical country. No such issues. The point of this book is not that we should not admire the Nordic countries. I believe we should admire them. But we should look at them with knowledge, not these childish simplifications. And I say Nordic countries are undeniably quite successful. How are they quite successful? They are wealthy, they have high equality, they have high employment, they have very good social outcomes. But why do they have it? Right? It's very simple. Why do they have good social outcomes and prosperity? So let's begin by looking at prosperity, wealth. There was an intellectual, a historian, who asked a very interesting question everybody seems to have forgotten. Why is Denmark 50% richer than Ireland? And he asked this in the 40s, in the 1940s. Why is Denmark much richer than Ireland? James Beattie asked. Fascinating question, because at this point, during the end of the 19th century, during the first half of the 20th century, Denmark was more prosperous than Ireland. But did it make sense? They were two similar countries. They were trading with the UK. They were producing milk and things like that. But Ireland had a bigger population. Ireland had better soil, better sunlight, better conditions to produce milk. They had water power. They had coal in the early industrialization. They had coal. Why was Denmark richer than Ireland considerably? Now, would anybody say socialism? No, not at this time. At this time, Denmark was what? A super capitalist society. They had a very small welfare state, very low taxes, very open economy, right? And admired abroad. So what was the answer? Denmark had free markets, more free markets than Ireland. Denmark had peace and social cohesion. Social cohesion. Danish people were working together. They would join. The farmers would cooperate. They would, cooperate and invest in new technologies. If you were a Danish milk farmer, you could go to a bank and get loan. An Irish milk farmer, maybe that's you, couldn't, because who trusts the Irish milk farmer? But everybody would trust the Danish milk farmer. So this is the root of Nordic success. We could learn in the 1940s. And I think there's a very important point here. But let's look at how prosperity developed. I'm showing the prosperity from 1870 and 100 years forward. Now let's change the focus a bit from Denmark to Sweden. Because Sweden went from being an agricultural society, kind of feudalist, to a free market capitalist society around the year 1870. Private property, all of these things, free enterprise. Now look at the growth that Sweden had when they introduced capitalism and 100 years later. Sweden is this black line. You see? They're growing much faster than any other industrialist country. 100 years of prosperity. And these 100 years, you know what's interesting about Sweden? What we never hear about the Swedish model? They had a welfare state. Throughout this period, protection of private property, openness to global markets, the government would not support failing businesses, and a limited government. It was 1960, 1970 when this started changing, when Sweden started getting high taxes. Look, phenomenal wealth creation. In a country with social cohesion, strong working norms, free markets, openness to trade. And the second country, growth, Denmark. Let's now look at the growth of Sweden after 1970, because then it was a, changed politics. Taxes were high, government was generous, benefits, government benefits. It started, social democracy really expanded. At the bottom. I mean, it's not horrible growth, but it's worse than the rest of Europe, and Denmark also. So where did Sweden and Denmark become prosperous? If you go back, what basically happens is that for a long period, until somewhere around here, Sweden is very, very, very free market. Then the first social democrats come to power. But they don't kill the goose that was laying the golden eggs. They don't really change capitalism initially, until 1968, when the left goes crazy. And but let's look at this. So for a long time, the Social Democrats had free markets policies. But let's just say we compare the period before Social Democrats came to power and after the first Social Democrat government. Before the first Social Democrat government in Sweden, it had the highest growth rate in the industrialized world. No other country like Sweden. After the Social Democrats came to power, 15th highest growth. Not very good. Now, I'm not arguing against the Social Democratic Party. I like them in many ways. They invite me to parliament, I give speeches. They're nice people. I have friends there. They did good stuff. Welfare has many advantages. But just look at the figures. When people say Sweden is rich because of social democracy, what the hell are they talking about? They haven't looked at the country. Okay, Denmark then. Same thing. Before Social Democrats, sixth highest growth rate in the industrialized world, after much lower. So prosperity of the Nordic countries evolved mainly before they had large welfare states, before they had social democratic politics, just as a matter of fact. But what about jobs? Perhaps growth comes from small government, but jobs, surely social democratic policy. Because the main focus of social democracy is not growth, it is job creation, full employment. This image, you know what this image is? It is a Great Depression, the largest crisis in modern world history, right? Every country in the world struggling with jobs, international trade collapsing. Many countries set up trade barriers to other countries, which in turn actually led to less jobs in the world. It was very bad, and jobs very, 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 very slowly returned. For decades, stagnation, right? Well, yes, but that is what happened in the United States. That is what happened in many industrialized countries. But what happened in the Nordics? United States of America responded to the Great Depression with what? With a New Deal. What was a New Deal? Government steps in. Government does the job. Government creates recovery. It wasn't a big success. They got stagnation. You know what the Nordic countries did? These famous socialist Great Depression? Nothing. They said the market will fix this. This is unemployment levels in the Nordic countries, Great Depression. You see, they go up because these are very small trade-dependent economies. Global trade collapses. They're affected. But then look at it. It goes down quickly. And it doesn't go down because the governments are borrowing money and throwing it into the economy. It didn't go down because government was creating jobs, like in other countries. No. Entrepreneurship happened. In Sweden, for example, many famous companies like Volvo Aero, like Saab, like Securitas were founded during or shortly after the Great Depression. Entrepreneurial capitalism, free labor markets got them out of the Great Depression. And these people forget. They say phenomenal Nordic model. Yes, it's a phenomenal Nordic model. You have a country, you have 4 countries with high working ethics, high trust, knowledge, and at the time, very free markets. They did superb in job creation. I want to compare 2 crises that happened in Sweden. The first is the Great Depression. What is the Great Depression? It is the single largest crisis in modern history, no? On that we can agree. And it hit Sweden when it's a low-tax country. That's the number of jobs in Sweden. You see the number of jobs. It goes up, it crashes, and then what? Goes up. What happens there? Entrepreneurship. A large number of successful enterprises, as I mentioned, are formed. And they just keep creating jobs. Look, it's just a few years until Sweden is back on track. Look at it. It is the greatest crisis in modern history. Pretty good model, no? When it was a low-tax country. I'm going to show you another crisis in Sweden that happened in the beginning of the 1990s. Now, why is this interesting? Because in the beginning of the 1990s, Sweden has a local crisis. It's Swedish crisis, housing crisis, financial crisis. But the world economy is growing. Sweden is an export country, trade country. Swedish companies are just exporting because people want to buy their products. Should have been a very small crisis. Actually, growth comes. But what about jobs? Look at jobs. Look at the 1990s crisis when Sweden is a high tax country with very generous welfare benefits. Look at the jobs. The population is growing, but jobs, stagnation. The government is creating jobs. The government is creating false jobs. You know, oh, you go to labor market program, you go to labor market program, we'll give this company money to hire you. They didn't do that here, just free market basically. But here, government is doing whatever they can. Look, it doesn't come up. Jobs recovered in 2008, 2009, which is funny, right? Because that's when the financial crisis came. So again, just look at the numbers. Which is most impressive? This a local crisis, or this the biggest crisis in world history, modern world history? Well, I say this one. Now, perhaps there is many good things to say about a high tax country, because you have a generous welfare, which has many advantages. Of course it does. But job creation worked much better when Sweden had a limited government model compared to today. And this is what we see in Finland also, which had a similar crisis. But you know what? Jobs, growth, okay. We get it. Free markets gives jobs and growth. But these are materialist things. We admire Sweden because of their social progress, right? Because welfare states, to a large degree, create social progress, of course. Governments are spending money on healthcare, on, you know, taking money from the rich, giving it to those who don't have. So let's look at broad measures of social success. Now, of course, one of these really broad measures is lifespan. Many people say, look, the Nordic people are living so long lives. If we have a Nordic social democratic model, our citizens will live longer. Now, if I raise your tax and you live longer, wouldn't you like that? He wouldn't. But the rest would. I would. Just one problem. Again, look at it carefully. The Nordic countries have a super unique culture. You know their unique culture where it came from? They are Protestants, they work hard. But more importantly, the Nordic countries are unique because they didn't have feudalism. In other parts of Europe, farmers were, you know, they didn't own their land. There were a few feudals, they owned the people. They were serfs. People didn't own land. In the Nordics, people were independent farmers. Independent farmers, and they were working in this horrible Nordic climate. If you didn't work hard, you starved. But if you worked hard, if you invested in your farm, you would be prosperous. In these societies, for hundreds of years, they lived in this climate and in this condition. So they learned, work very, very hard. Otherwise, you die in this cold country. But you know, work hard, build up a good farm, you're prosperous. And help your neighbor. So they also learned to take care of themselves. Jog in the forest, eat fish, live a long life. Here's life expectancy in the Nordic countries 1960, before the big welfare state. At a time when they had low taxes. And here it is at the peak of the welfare states, before they had begun to cut the taxes in 2005. Look at this image. In 1960, when the Nordic countries have small welfare states, Norway has the highest life expectancy. Third place, Iceland, Denmark. Nordic countries have high life expectancy. This means we should have social democracy? Really? Then why did these countries have long life expectancy before they had high taxes? Well, these people forget to mention. During the peak of the welfare states, Nordic countries are still having long life expectancy, but not the longest in the world. Look, Japan and Switzerland, two countries with low taxes, have longer life expectancy. Australia, a country that has very low taxes, very limited welfare state, everything in Australia kills you. I mean, literally, how many animals don't kill you in Australia? And look here. Denmark, look at Denmark. Look at how much they've fallen. Denmark currently has the highest tax in the world. Now, are we surprised that Denmark falls when it goes from a low tax country to a super high tax country? No. Why? Because taxes is not what determines lifespan. I'm not saying low taxes give you a high lifespan. That's nonsense. But high taxes don't give it either. It is culture. You know why Danish people are living so short lives? I know. I'm not killing them, I just know. They enjoy life. They smoke, they drink beer more than the Swedes. They live shorter lives. They're happy. They're smoking to death. Norway has the most generous welfare state on the planet because they have oil. Oh, they also fall. Sweden also falls. Iceland is the only one that climbs. Now, this is funny to me. You know what's different in Iceland and other Nordic countries? They have the smallest welfare state. They are living longer than all the other Nordic countries. But we know why. It's such a pleasant country. They have such a pleasant climate. They are living on a volcanic island made out of ice. And you know what shortens human lifespan? Cold. People die sooner in cold countries. Cold, cold kills. So, what the hell? What are you seeing here? What is Iceland? It's a bunch of Vikings stuck on the ice. Oh, I'm being serious. They have the most Nordic culture. Look, Iceland looks like, have you seen Lord of the Rings Mordor? Please, you can Google. They take images from Lord of the Rings, Mordor, and they show real images from Iceland, and you have to guess which is which. It's, volcanic wasteland. But the Icelandics, they go hiking in this volcanic wasteland. They eat fish, so they live long lives. Culture. What this image is showing us is not that high taxes is bad, that social democracy is bad. I'm not saying that. That's a stupid thing to say. It shows us that modern countries with very low taxes, with very high taxes, can achieve high lifespan. And if anything, Nordic countries had a supermodel when they had limited welfare states. Limited welfare states that gave basic services such as healthcare, education, but did not tax people a lot. Did not give people a lot of money not to work. That was a supermodel. But what about equality? Of course, this is what we should expect high taxes, generous benefits to create. Because if you have a good job and I just keep taxing you, obviously this creates equality in itself. And I give all this money to this guy who never works. Look at him. Just an example. Is correct? Wow. So I give you all her money. So, that is creating equality. Obviously it is. And maybe, a liberal would say, no, don't tax her. She's doing so good. And this guy, he's useless. But, just an example. But so that, sure. The Nordic system, of course, does to some degree create equality. But look also at income equality. When did it evolve? This is research. I'm citing a research article by Roine and Walderström. Most of the decrease in inequality takes place in Sweden before the expansion of the welfare state. And by 1950, Swedish top income shares were already lower than in other countries. Income equality in Sweden evolves before the welfare state. 1950, they had super low taxes. Have you heard this? Has any of these politicians who's like a child, oh, we should have a Nordic system, thought about this? No, they haven't. Why did we have equality in Sweden? Very simple. Free markets, entrepreneurship create jobs, and the working ethics, people, everybody's working hard, and people are helping each other. Not go to government, they actually help each other. Now they don't. Now you go to government. But then they had this system. It worked. They got equality. I'm showing you the income, and this is also shown for Denmark, by the way, in research. I'm showing you now the Gini coefficient, and if it's low, you have income equality. These are the modern economies that have equal incomes. I want you to disregard ideology, disregard liberalism, disregard socialism, just look at the countries, okay? What countries have equality? Iceland, number 1. Slovenia, Norway, Denmark, Czech Republic, Finland, Slovak Republic, Belgium, Austria, then comes Sweden. What?
That's just OECD countries, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of poor countries that could fit up top there.
Yes.
Being very equal.
Yes.
Okay.
What countries have equal incomes? What is common trait? Now, people say, oh, Nordic countries, look, the Nordic countries. And again, I would say they had it, historically, but it's not only Nordic countries. Begin with Iceland, the Nordic country with the smallest welfare state. Then Slovenia. Slovenia is not Nordic. It's not a high tax country, it's a low tax country. Czech Republic, not Nordic, it is a low tax country. Slovak Republic is a low tax country. So we have high tax countries like Denmark and low tax countries like Slovenia and medium tax countries like Iceland. It's not taxes we're seeing, obviously. We're seeing something else just staring at us, this obvious thing, but people don't see it because they're ideologues, they're socialists or liberals. Disregard ideology, just look at it. You know what we're seeing? We are seeing countries that have homogeneous populations. Iceland, a bunch of Vikings are stuck on the ice. One group of people in Iceland, Vikings. What happens if you have one group of people? They have more similar incomes. Anybody study statistics here? No? Okay. If you have one group, it's going to be much more similar. Mexico has very low income equality. Is it their politics? Maybe. America. These are mixed countries, a lot of different groups. And the different groups have, one group has incomes this here, one group here. You get huge variations because you have different groups. In Slovenia, you have one big group. In Norway, you have one big group. In Denmark, you have one big group. Homogeneous populations. Sweden has had immigrants like me, and we've destroyed their income equality. Because I earn a lot, but other immigrants earn too little. So this is what we see. Homogeneous populations. Now, a country that doesn't have a homogeneous population, Mexico, they could try to have a Swedish social democratic system. They wouldn't get Sweden's equality. They could have Slovenia's low tax system. They wouldn't get Slovenia's equality. Everything isn't politics, it's culture. Now, maybe we would want all the groups to have the same income. That's not the case. These are the realities of the world. So again, what are we seeing? What is the exceptional Nordic thing? Well, they have homogeneous populations. And when they get immigrants like Sweden, they fall. And this is, if we would get today's data that Sweden has received so many more immigrants, I promise you, if we could have today's data, you never can. There's, a few years later we'll have it. Then Sweden will be dropping here because the recent immigrants have very low incomes. One more thing. What happens if you take the Nordic culture and put it with capitalism today? We know this because there are more than 10 million Nordic Americans. Nordic origin living in capitalist America. Now, one thing I want you to remember. In the Nordic countries in the 19th century, 20th century, the poor people left for America. Not the rich, not the middle class, not the educated. Those who had no land, those who were hungry went to America in large groups. The Nordic Americans' population is larger than any Nordic country individually. And their incomes are much higher than their cousins in the Nordics. Even more surprising, the poverty level of Nordic Americans, you know what it is? It is the same or lower than in the Nordic countries themselves. Aha! Bernie Sanders says we should become Sweden. Then we will have it all. You have it all amongst the Swedish Americans. High incomes, low poverty. So what are we seeing? Culture, right? You work hard, you trust each other, you have social cohesion. It works arguably better in the capitalist American system than the Nordic high tax system. As we shouldn't be surprised, because what I find is the Nordic societies were much more successful in 1950, 1960, before they transitioned from a small, well-functioning, limited public sector, limited welfare model, to this large welfare model when the government just handing money to people who don't work. I call the book Scandinavian unexceptionalism because it is entirely unexceptional. Denmark is not violating the laws of the economic universe, it is following them. You have high trust, you have working ethics, you have free markets, what do you get? Growth. Of course you get growth. What else would you get? You have a transition towards high taxes, you get stagnation. You had a period when Sweden actually tried socialism. You know, there's only one period where one Nordic country tried socialism, tried to attack private property. It happened in Sweden around 1970. It was a disaster. Even the Social Democrats in Sweden never referred to this period. They've forgotten it. Forgotten. The former Communist Party in Sweden doesn't see this as a good thing. They don't talk about it. Right? You have small welfare states coupled with individual responsibility, you get social success. You have a massive expansion of taxes and government benefits, you get a culture of dependency. You know, I grew up with welfare support. I grew up in the culture of dependency. And I could see, there's a family, my family, many families, they were middle-class families. They come to Sweden, super high taxes, labor regulation, makes it difficult to get a job, very generous benefits, makes it very easy to live off government. And many families are like, wait a minute, we get more money on government benefits than on work. I mean, you would be a fool to say, I'm going to work, I have no time with my children, we have less money. The norms change. I'm saying that Nordic countries have these strong norms, working ethics, blah, 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 social cohesion, but they've changed because the politics changed. Norms change slowly. It don't change tomorrow. If you raise the taxes here, norms won't change tomorrow. You will behave the same. But in 5 years, 10 years, when you have children, they will adapt to high taxes and generous benefits. And their strong working ethics will not be there as strong. The World Values Survey asked Swedes, before they had adapted to large governments, do you believe it's justified to claim government benefits? The person said never. Now, this is the first time they asked the question. I promise you, even less people, probably 100% close, would say never. 18% say yes, sometimes you can misuse government benefits. They ask it now, 45% say, oh, okay, it's okay. They openly say, it's okay to misuse government benefits. I get the benefit, I'm not entitled to it. The norms have changed as people have adapted to a very generous welfare state. I'm not saying don't have a generous welfare state. If you want it, have it. It has many benefits. You're giving money to the poor, etc., etc. Everybody has healthcare, the same healthcare. But you will get this change. Now, I'm going to bore you with a lot of research because it's interesting fact, the last interesting fact, that there is very detailed research in Nordic countries which shows that conclusively the very generous welfare states has destroyed people's norms. It's not a political thing I'm saying to you. Research. One researcher shows that Sweden introduced a system where you can say, I'm sick, give me benefits. And many Swedes do this. And many Swedes have neighbors who are not sick, they're just living off the benefits. It's widely known. This guy shows that when the government introduced generous system, you can get benefits, not much happened. Then a few years went. Then people started misusing the system. You know, you're not really sick. You want to watch a soccer game, they call in sick. That's one of the things that the men are. They are sick when there are soccer games. And this just kept, the change kept going. Like 20 years after the system was introduced, it just kept going. And he just says, look, this is a measure of how rapidly the welfare state affects attitudes towards the use of public benefits. It just slowly erodes the norms. Okay, misuse benefits. Why not? My neighbor is doing it. I can do it too. Much evidence suggests that the welfare state also has a very costly and long-lasting effect on working ethic of Danes. Another study. So the Nordic norms have been, to some degree, destroyed by the very generous welfare state. Not as a matter of my opinion, not as a matter of ideology, as a matter of research. The last thing is this. Now, in Norway, this guy, I use you as an example again. Why not? We've established that. He doesn't work, blah, blah. He'll take it. He's a brave guy. So he goes to the government and says, give me, I'm early retirement. I'm sick. And they say, objectively, you're not sick. Look at you, healthy and strong. But then he can go to a court, because Norway has the most generous welfare system in the world, because they have oil, right? So he can go to a court, and the court can say, we give him welfare sick leave anyway. Now, the researchers use the fact that there are two kinds of judges. Conservative judges who say, you're not entitled. They almost always say no, because they're conservative. They go by the book. And they have these nice judges, the soft judges, the progressive judges who say, yes, of course, benefits for everybody. So what can the researchers do? It is a random process which judge you're given, right? And this is a natural experiment. It's a scientific tool to clearly separate cause and causation. So they can separate, this is very unique in science, they can separate what happens if you have too much welfare, and if you have not too much welfare. You know what happens? If the judge is progressive and grants you the welfare, you will be much higher chance of being stuck in welfare. And your children will also be affected. The next generation, his children, are likely to also be in welfare support. But if you had been given the conservative judge, you would have been more likely to get a job, and your children. So the welfare state is trapping people in welfare dependency. Absolutely it is. We know it by science. And I don't like this. I grew up like this. This is causing poverty. It's causing immigrant ghettos. We are moving towards a new Nordic model. All these politicians were admiring Nordic social democracy. Jesus Christ, go to the Nordics. We have good social democrats, but they're not socialists. They're not. They're pragmatic, they're pro-private ownership, pro-markets. They're working in many to reduce the taxes. Reducing the generosity of welfare state, not because they don't believe in welfare, but because they're saying it's too much welfare dependency. This guy, Kiroden, used to be a social democrat finance minister of Denmark. You know what he's saying there? Well, you can't read Danish, can you? He's saying the competition state is a new welfare state. Social democrats in government having a broad discussion, we should reduce this system of people living off the government. The welfare state should go back to giving basic services, giving, of course, money if you're sick, but not creating this system where a lot of people get money from the government instead of working. You know, Denmark is socialist, yes? Come on. Have you read the Index of Economic Freedom? It is one of the most free market countries on the planet, except high taxes. Free labor legislation, private property, free trade. The government doesn't interfere in the economy. The government just supports education and research. This is Denmark, not a socialist country. And the social democrats there want to have a slimmer public sector. They want to change the social contract. That's what they're saying. And now they have a right-wing government, which of course wants this even more. Now, I've written more in these two papers about all this. I have a new book very much about the issue of how the Nordic system affects women's career opportunities. And I'm coming out with a book in the US market, which is twice as many words as this. But hopefully, if you read it, there's more about it. And my core message is that we should admire Nordic system. We should even admire their welfare states. But perhaps not the excess of Nordic welfare states. Perhaps not think that they're socialist countries, whereas in fact, their prosperity comes from free markets and hard work. Thank you.